It was a cold evening in Paris. The stadium lights had already dimmed, and the last of the fans were slowly making their way out after a thrilling match between Paris Saint-Germain and Marseille. The air was filled with the buzz of excitement, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent of disappointment. PSG had won, but not by much. It wasn't the kind of victory fans were used to seeing. The atmosphere wasn't full of cheers and celebration like it usually was. Instead, the streets around the stadium were quieter than expected, with fans murmuring about missed opportunities and mistakes on the field. Among the crowd, there was a young boy, maybe 14 or 15 years old, standing near the exit where the players would come out. His name was Lucas. He had always dreamed of seeing his idols, Messi and Neymar, out close. He didn't have the best seat in the stadium, but that didn't matter to him. He was hoping for a quick glimpse of them, maybe a handshake or even a wave. As the players started to exit, Lucas tried to hold back his excitement. He knew better than to push forward or shout out. He had seen the crowds around other famous athletes before, and he knew the chaos that could follow. So he kept his distance, leaning slightly against the wall, trying to be invisible in a crowd of excited fans. Then something caught his attention. There, just a few feet away from him, were Messi and Neymar walking together. At first, they seemed to be chatting casually, but as Lucas watched, he noticed something wasn't right. There was a tension in the air, something that didn't feel like the friendly, easygoing atmosphere fans were used to seeing between the two superstars. Neymar raised his voice slightly, not enough to make out the words, but there was a clear sense of frustration in his tone. Messi, who was usually calm and collected, didn't respond immediately. He just kept walking, his face unreadable. Neymar's hand shot up in a gesture that seemed to mix confusion and anger, and Messi, still silent, looked away. Lucas felt a pang of discomfort in his stomach. He wasn't sure what was happening, but the body language between the two players was unmistakable. It didn't seem like a normal conversation. Without thinking, Lucas pulled out his phone and started recording. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was just the excitement of being so close to them, but he knew this moment felt different from any other. He could hear Neymar's voice now, more clearly, and it sounded strained. "You don't trust me anymore," Neymar said, his voice trembling slightly. Messi, still not facing him, replied softly, "It's not about trust. It's about what we've become." Lucas's heart raced. He didn't understand what was going on, but the words felt heavy, like a secret unfolding in front of him. He continued recording, his hand shaking slightly as he captured the moment. He wasn't sure what he had just witnessed, but one thing was clear. This wasn't the friendship or bond he had imagined between two of the world's greatest football players. The video Lucas had unwittingly recorded would go on to spread across the internet, but at that moment he was just a young fan who had stumbled upon something no one was supposed to see. The conversation wasn't over yet, and the tension between the two players seemed to grow. But Lucas didn't know that what he was witnessing was just the beginning of something much bigger. It was a quiet night in Paris, but the echoes of the game still lingered in the minds of the fans. PSG had won, but it hadn't felt like a victory. The final whistle had blown, and the team had walked off the field with the usual applause, but something was off. There was a strange atmosphere, a heavy air that seemed to surround the players, especially Messi and Neymar. The crowd outside the stadium, usually buzzing with energy after a win, was quieter than usual. People talked about the match, but the excitement seemed to have faded quickly. As the players made their way to the locker room, the cameras captured every move. But the television screens didn't show what was happening off camera. What the fans didn't see, what the reporters didn't hear, was the frustration building between two of the brightest stars on the team. Messi, normally calm and composed, was unusually distant. Neymar, usually the lively spark of the team, seemed more agitated than anyone had ever seen him. The frustration had been growing for weeks, but this was the first time it was so clear. During the game, there had been moments when both players missed opportunities that they usually would have scored. Messi had tried to set up Neymar a few times, but the passes had gone wide, or Neymar had fumbled the ball. It wasn't the usual flawless coordination between the two, and everyone could sense it. Their usual magic on the field, the perfect understanding they shared, seemed to be slipping away. Fans noticed it too, murmuring in the stands, unsure of what was going wrong. For Messi, the loss of connection was hard to ignore. He had always been the playmaker, the quiet leader who let his feet do the talking. But this time, even his normally precise passes were not landing where they should. Neymar, on the other hand, was frustrated by the lack of support. He was trying to create chances, but there were too many moments when he was left alone, or didn't receive the ball in the right place at the right time. Back in the locker room, things weren't much better. The team was talking about the game, but the tension was palpable. Messi and Neymar, who had once seemed inseparable on and off the pitch, were barely speaking. Neymar, always the first to crack a joke or lighten the mood, kept to himself, while Messi focused on his gear, his face a mixture of concentration and fatigue. The usual banter wasn't there, the kind of casual conversations they used to have. Instead, it felt like there was an invisible wall between them, one that neither player knew how to break down. Even as the players gathered for the post-match interviews, the tension remained. Messi answered questions briefly, his eyes focused elsewhere, while Neymar, although smiling, seemed distracted, his mind elsewhere. The usual energy that came with a PSG victory wasn't there, and for the first time, it seemed like there was something much deeper than just a game weighing on both of them. Outside the locker room, fans continued to chant, but inside, the quiet was deafening. Messi and Neymar, once close friends, were now lost in their own thoughts, the unspoken tension between them growing. The connection they once had seemed fragile, and for those who knew them best, it was clear that something important was shifting, something that might take more than just a good game to fix. Little did anyone know, things were about to get even more complicated. The night had grown colder, and the crowds outside the stadium were slowly thinning. Most fans had left, their excitement fading as quickly as the cheers from the final whistle. But not everyone had left. Among the few who stayed behind, there was a young boy, Lucas, who had managed to stay close to the player's exit. His phone was in his hand, his heart racing with anticipation. He had hoped for a glimpse of Messi or Neymar, maybe even a quick autograph. But what he got instead was something that would change everything. As the doors to the players' tunnel opened, Lucas noticed Messi and Neymar walking out together. They were usually seen laughing and talking, a friendly bond between two of the world's greatest players. But tonight was different. Their usual camaraderie seemed to have vanished. There was an air of tension between them that Lucas could feel, even from a distance. Neymar, who had been quiet throughout the game, seemed on edge now. He was walking slightly ahead of Messi, his body language tight. Messi was a few steps behind him, his face unreadable. Neymar's hands were moving quickly, his voice rising, though not loud enough for Lucas to hear exactly what he was saying. It was clear, though, that something was bothering him. He turned to Messi, and his words became clearer. "You don't trust me anymore." Neymar's voice was strained, like someone who had been holding in their feelings for too long. His words hung in the air, and Lucas could feel the weight of them. He wasn't sure what had caused this sudden outburst, but he knew this wasn't just a typical disagreement over a missed goal or a bad pass. This was something deeper. Messi, who had been quiet up until that point, finally spoke. His voice was low, almost too soft to hear clearly, but the words that reached Lucas were heavy. "It's not about trust. It's about what we've become." There was a long pause after that. Neymar stopped walking, his head down, and Lucas could see the frustration building in him. Messi kept walking, his gaze straight ahead, avoiding Neymar's eyes. The tension between the two was thick now, and Lucas couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. He had grown up idolizing these two players, watching them play with such grace and chemistry on the field. But now, standing just a few feet away, he saw something different. It was a side of them that the fans didn't see, the human side, the side that felt the pressure, the disappointments, and the weight of expectations. Neymar spoke again, his voice a little quieter this time, but still filled with emotion. "I left Barca to lead, not to lose you," he said. There was a hint of sadness in his tone, but also anger, as if he was trying to make sense of what had happened. Messi didn't respond immediately. He kept walking, his steps slow, as if he was trying to avoid the confrontation. But the distance between them only seemed to grow. Lucas kept recording, his hand shaking slightly. He didn't know why he was doing it. Maybe it was because he knew this was a rare moment, something that no one was supposed to see. But as he watched the two legends walk away from each other, the realization hit him. What he had just witnessed wasn't just an argument between two players. It was the unraveling of something much bigger. The two men who had once shared a bond that seemed unbreakable were now drifting apart, and no one knew what the future held for them. Lucas stood there, staring at his phone, trying to make sense of what he had just recorded. He had captured a moment that no one was meant to see, a moment that was both personal and powerful. As Messi and Neymar walked away from each other, the world they had built together seemed to crack. The bond that fans had admired for years, The friendship that had made them one of football's most iconic duos now felt uncertain. For years, Messi and Neymar had been the perfect pair on the field. At Barcelona, they had formed a connection that made the game look easy. Whether it was a quick 1-2 pass or an amazing assist, their understanding of each other was flawless. Fans marveled at their chemistry, often calling them the best duo in the world. Messi, with his quiet determination and unparalleled skill, worked perfectly alongside Neymar's flair, creativity, and energy. Together, they had won trophies, broken records, and created countless unforgettable moments. Off the field, they were just as close. They laughed together, shared stories, and supported each other through the highs and lows of their careers. But that was in the past. Lucas had grown up watching them, admiring the way they played and the way they interacted with each other. He had seen the videos of them celebrating goals together, hugging after a big win, and joking around during practice. Their friendship seemed unbreakable, something that went beyond football. But now, standing in the quiet night air, Lucas felt the weight of the change that was unfolding before him. What had happened between them? Neymar had left Barcelona, seeking a new challenge at PSG, but no one had expected this. Everyone thought that their bond would stay strong, that Neymar's decision would only make them stronger. But now, with the argument in the players' exit tunnel, it was clear that something had shifted. Messi and Neymar were no longer the carefree pair they once were. There was something underneath their words, something that had been building for months, maybe even years. Messi had always been a reserved figure, focused on his game, rarely letting personal matters spill into his professional life. But this time his silence spoke volumes. The words he had spoken to Neymar. It's not about trust. It's about what we've become. We're heavy. What did he mean? Was it about Neymar's move to PSG? Was it the pressure of playing for a new team? Or was it something deeper, something neither player was willing to confront until now? Neymar, too, seemed to be struggling with his own emotions. He had come to PSG hoping to take on a larger role, to become the leader he had always dreamed of being. But now, in the midst of this argument, it seemed like the weight of his decision was catching up with him. Was he disappointed with how things had turned out? Had he expected more from his relationship with Messi? The words he had said, "I left Barca to lead, not to lose you," were a cry for understanding. The two men who had once been so in sync now seemed to be on different paths, each struggling to find their place in a changing world. The years of friendship, shared victories, and quiet moments had somehow led them here. Lucas, still holding his phone, realized that he had just witnessed something more than an argument. It was a turning point, something that would affect both players for the rest of their careers. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. The bond between Messi and Neymar was no longer the same, and no one knew if it could ever go back to how it had been before. As the days passed, Lucas couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed. He had seen something that no one was supposed to see, something that no fan could have ever imagined happening between two of the greatest football players in the world. Messi and Neymar, who had once seemed inseparable, now seemed to be unraveling before his eyes. The argument, captured on his phone, echoed in his mind as he tried to understand what it all meant. Neymar's voice had stayed with him. "You don't trust me anymore?" It wasn't just a question. It was a cry for help, a feeling of betrayal that Neymar couldn't hide. He had come to PSG with hopes of leading the team, of stepping out of Messi's shadow. But what if that dream wasn't turning out the way he had hoped? What if the pressure of being the leader wasn't what he had imagined? And worse, what if the person he had trusted most in the football world, Messi, was now distant and quiet, someone who seemed to have lost faith in him? Messi's response to Neymar was just as striking. "It's not about trust. It's about what we've become." Those words stayed with Lucas too. Messi had always been the calm one, the player who didn't show his emotions easily. But now, in those few words, Lucas could hear the weight of something deep inside Messi, the frustration, the confusion, and the disappointment. Messi wasn't just frustrated with the game or the loss. He was frustrated with the situation he found himself in. The relationship with Neymar had changed. The team had changed. Maybe even Messi himself had changed. What had happened to their connection, the one that had made them the perfect pair on the field? What had happened to the friendship that seemed unbreakable, the one that had brought them countless victories? Lucas couldn't help but wonder if they had drifted too far apart, both in their playing styles and in their personal lives. It seemed as though their bond, once so natural and effortless, had become something strained and complicated. Football had always been their shared passion, but now it felt like they were no longer playing the same game. Neymar's final words, "I left Barca to lead, not to lose you," spoke volumes about his inner turmoil. Neymar had made the bold decision to leave Barcelona, to find his own path at PSG. But was it really what he had wanted? Was it the right choice? In that moment, Neymar's voice cracked, revealing the vulnerability beneath his confident exterior. He had come to PSG expecting to be the star, but instead he found himself facing unexpected challenges. The pressure to live up to expectations, the weight of the team's hopes, and the distance between him and Messi were taking a toll. Messi, who had always been the steady force at Barcelona, seemed to be struggling with his own feelings. He had always been the one to lead by example, to inspire his teammates with his skill and vision. But now, in the changing world of PSG, things felt different. He wasn't sure if he could be the player he once was, or if the team could find the same magic it had in the past. As Lucas stood there, still holding his phone, he realized that this argument wasn't just about a single moment. It was about something much bigger. It was about the shifting dynamics of a team, the changing roles of its players, and the pressure that comes with fame and expectations. Messi and Neymar, two of the greatest players in football history, were now facing a challenge that was much more difficult than anything they had ever encountered on the pitch. It wasn't just an argument. It was the unraveling of something that, once lost, might never be the same again. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Messi and Neymar was still very much alive, even if it wasn't as obvious to the public. The media had caught wind of the argument, and while they didn't know the full story, the rumors were everywhere. The cameras caught small moments during PSG's games, glances, gestures, and brief exchanges between the two players. But it wasn't enough for fans to make sense of what had really happened. The smiles and handshakes during post-match celebrations were still there, but there was something forced about them, as though the joy they once shared had been replaced by an uncomfortable formality. Inside the PSG locker room, the change was even more noticeable. The air was thick with quiet. Messi, who had always been reserved, now seemed even more distant, keeping mostly to himself. Neymar, who had once been the center of attention, now kept his distance too, his usual energy subdued. The two rarely spoke. On the pitch, they tried to play together as best as they could, but their connection was no longer the seamless flow it once had been. The passes weren't as sharp, the runs weren't as synchronized. Something was missing, and both players knew it. Neymar tried to hold on to the hope that things would get better, that he and Messi would find a way to fix what had broken. He had come to PSG with big dreams, hoping to step out from the shadow of Barcelona and lead the team to success. But it hadn't gone as planned. The pressure was mounting, and it seemed like every move he made was being scrutinized. He had always been the player to take risks, to make the unexpected play, but now it felt like he was walking on eggshells. Every pass, every dribble, every touch was weighed down by the feeling that something was wrong between him and Messi. For Messi, the situation was just as difficult. He had always been the quiet leader, letting his actions speak louder than words. But now his silence seemed to be a sign of his own internal struggle. Messi had been through so much in his career: success, failure, triumphs, and setbacks. But this felt different. This wasn't about losing a match or missing a goal. This was about something more personal. He had once trusted Neymar, had once thought of him as a brother on and off the field. But now that trust seemed fragile, and Messi wasn't sure how to fix it. In private moments, when the team wasn't around, both players reflected on everything that had happened. Neymar thought about his decision to leave Barcelona. He had believed it would be the start of something new, a chance to take the spotlight and lead a team on his own. But now he wondered if that choice had caused more harm than good. He missed the ease with which he and Messi played together. The connection they had once shared had been special, and Neymar couldn't help but feel a deep sense of regret for what had been lost. Messi, too, found himself reflecting on his past with Neymar. He had always known Neymar had the potential to be a great player, but the path they were now on felt uncertain. He had always believed in teamwork, in playing for the good of the group. But now, with the weight of personal differences and unspoken frustrations hanging in the air, it seemed harder to believe in the harmony they once had. Could they fix it? Could they rebuild their relationship, or was the damage too deep? The days of easy victories and celebrations seemed like a distant memory. Now both Messi and Neymar were left wondering if they could ever get back to the place they had once been, united, powerful, and unstoppable together. But the silence between them spoke louder than any words ever could. The weeks seemed to drag on, and the atmosphere around PSG felt heavier than ever. Messi and Neymar were still doing their best to keep their professional image intact, but their relationship had become a silent battle. On the outside, everything appeared normal. The team was winning games, the goals were still coming, and the fans cheered them on as usual. But anyone who had been paying close attention could see that the magic between Messi and Neymar was no longer there. The understanding, the chemistry that had once defined them, was now replaced by an awkward distance. One afternoon, after a tough match against a rival team, the locker room was quieter than usual. The players were wiping sweat from their brows and changing into their casual clothes. But there was no music playing, no laughter. Messi sat at his locker, his eyes on the floor, lost in thought. Neymar, sitting on the opposite side, wasn't speaking either. The sound of the showers running was the only noise filling the room. It felt like the weight of everything, the frustration, the missed opportunities, the unspoken words, was pressing down on both of them. Then something unexpected happened. As Neymar stood up to leave, he paused for a moment and turned toward Messi. It was the first time in days that he had spoken to him directly. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as if he was unsure of what to say. "Messi, we need to talk." Messi didn't immediately respond. He simply looked at Neymar, his face unreadable. The moment hung in the air, thick with tension. For a long while, neither of them moved, but finally, Messi nodded, his eyes meeting Neymar's. "Yeah, we do," he said softly. The two of them left the locker room together, walking in silence down the hallway. They stepped outside into the cool evening air, away from the cameras and reporters who were waiting just outside the stadium. It was rare for players to talk like this in public, but it was clear that something needed to be said. The fans had no idea what was happening behind closed doors, but for Messi and Neymar, this moment felt like the first step toward mending what had been broken. They walked to a quiet corner away from everyone else and finally sat down. There was an uncomfortable pause before Neymar spoke again. "I'm sorry for how things turned out. I thought we would be able to keep going like we did before, but I guess I was wrong." His voice was full of regret, but also a little bit of pain. Messi looked at him for a long time, and Neymar wasn't sure if Messi would respond at all. But then Messi sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly as if he had been carrying a heavy burden for too long. "I didn't want things to be like this," Messi said quietly. "But maybe I've been afraid to admit that things have changed. It's not just you, Neymar. It's me too." The two of them sat there for a while, the weight of their words hanging between them. For the first time in weeks, the tension seemed to lift, even if only for a moment. They both understood that things weren't going to be fixed overnight. The road to rebuilding their relationship would be long and difficult, but this conversation, this acknowledgement, was the first real step forward. As they got up to leave, Messi gave Neymar a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a promise that everything would be perfect from now on, but it was a sign that they were both willing to try. They walked back inside the stadium, still facing the challenges ahead, but perhaps now with a glimmer of hope that things could improve. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time in a while, both Messi and Neymar felt like they were moving in the right direction. It was a small step, but sometimes even the smallest steps could make all the difference. After their conversation that evening, things between Messi and Neymar didn't magically improve overnight. They didn't suddenly become the perfect duo again, but the air between them felt different. There was a shift, a small crack in the wall that had grown between them. They didn't talk much in the days that followed, but their interactions were more open, more sincere. It was clear that both of them were trying, in their own way, to move forward. The games continued, and so did the pressure. PSG was competing in the Champions League, and every match felt like it was making or breaking their season. Messi and Neymar were still trying to find their rhythm, but something had changed on the field. It wasn't perfect, but their passes had more intent, their runs more synchronized. The understanding that had been lost was starting to return, even if only in small glimpses. One game against a tough opponent was a turning point. Neymar had the ball at his feet, dribbling past two defenders with his usual flair. He could have taken the shot himself, but instead he glanced up and saw Messi in the perfect position. Without hesitation, Neymar passed the ball. Messi, in his calm and collected style, slotted it into the net. The stadium erupted with cheers. But for Messi and Neymar, the moment was more than just a goal. It was a sign that they were starting to find their old connection again. After the goal, there was no grand celebration, no flashy gestures. Instead, Neymar simply nodded at Messi, a silent acknowledgement of what had just happened. Messi nodded back, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something. It was progress. In the locker room after the match, the atmosphere was lighter. The players were talking more freely, even joking around. Messi and Neymar exchanged a few words, but this time it wasn't out of obligation. There was no tension in the air, no silent resentment. It was as if the weight they had been carrying was slowly lifting. But the real breakthrough came a few days later, when Neymar approached Messi after a team training session. It was a simple conversation, but it was the kind of conversation they hadn't had in months. "Thanks for trusting me again," Neymar said, his voice soft but sincere. Messi, who had always been the quiet one, looked at Neymar for a long moment before responding. "We're a team. That's what matters." Messi's words were simple, but they held a lot of weight. Neymar smiled, feeling the truth of them sink in. They weren't just two individual stars. They were part of something bigger. They had been through ups and downs, and maybe there would still be more challenges ahead, but they knew they could face them together. It wasn't a perfect fix. The road to rebuilding their relationship would take time, but in that moment, Messi and Neymar both realized that the bond they had shared was far from broken. It had just needed time and understanding to heal. As the season went on, PSG started to play with more confidence. Messi and Neymar still had their moments of frustration, but they were learning to communicate better, to trust each other again. And even though things weren't exactly the same as they once were, both players understood that sometimes rebuilding something broken could lead to an even stronger connection. In the end, it wasn't just the goals or the victories that mattered. It was the journey of rediscovering trust, of finding a way to move forward together, even when it seemed impossible. And for Messi and Neymar, that was a victory in itself.